Welcome all to the Smith School. I'm Alex Trianis. I'm the Dean of the Smith School of Business, and I know many of you are from here, but we have folks from all over campus, and so thank you, and beyond campus, I should say, so thank you all for coming for this very special event. The guest of honor, of course, is Professor Rajshree Agarwal, and it is my great pleasure to get to introduce her. I am not going to go through all of her research. I will let her do that. That's what we're here for, to hear a little bit more about it. But as you probably know, that Rajshree focuses on entrepreneurship and innovation and the impact of dynamics and evolution of firms and of industries. And she does so looking at sort of underlying mechanisms of employee entrepreneurship and mobility and aggregating that up to a macro level. She's very widely published. Many of her papers have received awards. And in my mind, I would say that Rajshree sort of epitomizes what we think a 21st century scholar should be. First of all, her work always is highly relevant and has a lot of impact. Impact in the profession, impact in the general public, and the impact on business through media and her direct participation with businesses. Secondly, it's always done with very rigorous analysis. So we talk about data. There's a lot of data that Rajshree looks at, and so everything is very informed in a very rigorous way. Third of all, her focus and her thought process is always very cross-disciplinary. Something that we are all trying to promote, and she certainly achieves in terms of the people she talks to and works with. And her thought process as well, from coming from a economics background, but certainly being very knowledgeable now in the areas of organizations and behavior. This is also, I think, really epitomized in the work that she's done with the Snyder Center for Enterprise and Markets, where she is the founding and current director of the center. And again, it really is an area where she always stresses relevance and impact. It is a very cross-functional area, a center across the whole university, and it's already having, I think, a huge impact, including designing debates on difficult issues that we all need to talk about in the open, and I think she's done a fabulous job on that. Now, this is a Distinguished Scholar Teacher Award. So the other part is the teacher, and I'm sure that there's a lot of her former students who can attest even better in terms of the quality and impact of the teaching that Rajshree has done. I have had the pleasure of co-teaching one session every year together with Rajshree, so I've literally side by side been able to sort of marvel at her ability to elicit student participation, get people really excited about a topic, and then somehow be able to weave together 20 disparate comments on into just a perfect tapestry of different ideas. And so she really is a master at that, and she does it always with a great deal of passion and energy. So we're going to get to see a little bit of that today. And it gives me great joy to introduce you to our new Distinguished Scholar teacher, Rajshree Agarwal.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. After that introduction, I might as well sit and not have you be disappointed the rest of the time, right? Thank you for coming. I've always been fascinated by innovation and enterprise as engines of growth of individuals, of firms, and of economies. Indeed, the dynamics that are unleashed by innovation and entrepreneurship go across all levels. And that, in fact, is the focus of the research that I have done over the last 25 years now. So I'd like to share with you today some of what I have learned in this process as I examine individuals within knowledge contexts, interacting with themselves and within organizations, and how the firms that they choose to participate in also compete within industries and hence create growth in economies as new industries emerge from these interactions and dynamics. I'd like to share with you, however, the fact that this is very much a shared journey. So even though I stand here today talking to you about my research journey, it is very much in the context of my collaborations with my mentors, with my colleagues, and with my students. So I stand here today, yes, in the limelight, and boy, they're blinding, in gratitude for all of you, many of you who are here today, to share this with me. So thank you. And in that spirit, I want to start with acknowledging a debt that I owe to Michael Gort and Stephen Klepper. Michael was my advisor. And the legacy of Michael Gort and Stephen Klepper was really taking deep dives into phenomena that they were interested in and letting the data inform theory development. This often required, rather than using just canned data sets, creating databases from scratch, often hand coding the data. Sergey is in the audience here. He also comes from that lineage. He's doing a gigantic effort in doing the entire Japanese cotton spinning industry, for instance, and I get to be part of that journey with him. But that is exactly what Michael and Stephen represented and taught us. Get the data, hand code them if necessary, but really get them from as many sources as you can to paint as full a picture as you can. And of course, underlying that is this intellectual curiosity that spans across levels of analysis, across disciplines. In fact, one of my other favorite quotes is from Raj, a co-author of mine, that says, ideas don't know what discipline they're in. And indeed, that is part of the legacy that I bring, not just from my mentors, but also from my colleagues and co-authors. And I've also benefited from paying it forward. So these fine young scholars, each and every one of them, as they've done their dissertations, some that are doing their dissertation as we speak, several of you are going to come up here in later presentations of mine, so be on the watch out. What am I learning from you? Right? That is exactly what they've taught me. They've done their own empirical deep dives into industries, and they have provided me with theoretical insights that have informed my own knowledge of the dynamics between innovation and enterprise. So I share this with them. Let me go ahead and talk to you a little bit about this journey that I've had as I have conducted research on these areas. So my own research evolution, if I'm thinking about journeys and I study evolution, of course I'm going to think about my own research and how that has evolved. So as Alex noted, I started off as a scholar in economics, studying industrial organization. About 8 or 9 years later, I moved into strategy and into a business school. And I cared about what firms were doing. And then I moved into entrepreneurship and the attention on individuals. And then finally today, I am much more into enterprise and markets. So what I'd like to do is share with you each of these stages, what I learned in the process, and how each of these stages set me up for the next stage. So Schumpeter is often called the father of innovation and entrepreneurship. An economist that rejected mainstream economics focus on equilibrium, on steady state, on marginal analysis. And in this concept of creative destruction, what he focused on is the competitions that emerge from new commodities, new technologies, new supply chains, new organizations. Competition that hits at the very heart of firms that are existing today. So this is not about margins. This is about the very existence, the very livelihoods of organizations. He says this kind of competition is in the long run what expands output and brings down prices. So Alicia, you're in Economics 101 right now. Learn the marginal analysis, yes. That's my daughter. I can talk to her too, right? But think about evolution and how that matters as well. Okay. So, because I was looking at industries, and as an industrial organization scholar, I was working with Michael Gord, and this picture is from the Gordon Klepper seminal article that talks about the dynamics of industries, which evolved from first commercialization of the product into maturity. Here, the premise of my first stage research is that the industry structure, the stage of the industry life cycle, is going to determine how firms are going to behave, their strategies, and as a result, what their performance is going to be. In addition to Michael Gord and Stephen Klepper, my intellectual heritage very much came from this classic, what is called structure, conduct, performance paradigm in economics associated with Bain, and then of course with Richard Caves and Michael Porter. My own work focused a lot more on the emergence of industries. And so in one of the studies, we focused, with Barry Bayes, I looked across about 25 industries that were introduced across the 19th to the 20th century. And we were able to track from multiple sources data on all of the firms that engaged in production in this very early stage. By the way, these data are very difficult to come by. And as a result, even those 25 industries were very painful in order to get that. So yes, I thank Michael in terms of the painstaking, but then I thank Michael for the painstaking effort that I had to go through. And then we also captured firms. The early study that we wanted to do was really use firms and them taking off as an explanation for sales, in part because the dominant explanation at this time for why sales in an industry take off is really that price has to go down. If price goes down, quantity is going to go up. Demand curve, classic analysis out here. But that begs the question, what causes price to go down? And rather than assuming this monopoly-like model where there's a single firm that has the ability to price make and decide when they want to decrease price, and as a result, sales is going to go up, what we found out here is no. We could not do that analysis of figuring out whether sales would take off faster or not if firms take off, because firms always took off before sales took off. So as you know, if you're trying to do a regression analysis, if there is no variation on the independent variable, that cannot be done. But it also informed us of the fact that sales takeoff is a necessary condition for, firm takeoff is a necessary condition for sales to take off. What does that mean? That really means that in the classic field of dream style, if you build it, they will come. However, to build it, firms need to invest a lot in the infrastructure. They need to invest in the legitimacy of the industry. And so this study helped me understand that the primacy of even sales taking off has to come from some effort that's being made by enterprising firms that choose to invest in an industry and help it take off. Another interesting fact was in a study that I conducted with Michael Gord, where because for my dissertation I had gathered data on 33 industries from 1883 all the way to 1991. And so I had managed to get all of the firms operating in all of these industries using the Thomas Register of American Manufacturers. And as I was doing this data analysis, Rob, in fact, was one of my TAs helping me with the data gathering. So this is when I realized an important fact, and that seemed to be the case, that the time to firm takeoff was shrinking across industries that had been introduced earlier versus industries that were introduced much later. To give you an example, one of the products in my dissertation data set was phonograph records. Edison enjoyed 33 years of monopoly status before competitive entry came into the industry. Contrast that in 1983 when CD players, same need being met, was introduced, competitive entry occurred within 3 years. The question is why? Why was there a shrinkage in the time to sales, to firm takeoff? And the answer, as Michael and I were digging into it, was not because of capital intensity, that some industries are more capital intensive, so they're going to take longer, and as a result, that might happen. It wasn't even because of labor intensity. It wasn't any different between producer goods and consumer goods. But the data we had seemed to give us a little bit of an inkling, and the inkling was related to the underlying knowledge diffusion. It seemed to be the case that as tenure of individuals across firms or within firms was shrinking, as there was more and more mobility, these individuals were acting as conduits of knowledge transfer. And that could explain why firms were being able to enter in a competitive manner much faster than others. Hold on to that thought. We're going to come back to it a little bit later as well. But even as I'm doing these studies, I have to confess, industries don't make decisions. Firms do. And ultimately, I was interested in the firms as being the fountainhead of the dynamics that we were observing. So this led me to the next realization, and that is that even though there was some attention paid to firm heterogeneity, in my own studies, I had looked across these panels of firms, across panels of industries that I'd gathered. But really, when you're comparing across industries, the best measures that you can get that can aggregate across are firm size, firm age, and whether or not they're diversified. And they're really very crude to get into the nitty-gritty detail of what makes firms different and why does this matter. So I needed to expand my focus. In addition to doing all of these multiple industry studies, I needed to go deep dive into single industries and really unpack this black box for a deeper understanding of what causes firms to make the decisions that they do. So in this, again, Schumpeter is very wise. He talks about creative destruction from the strategy point of view. And here he says, every piece of business strategy acquires its significance only in this backdrop of this process and within the situation created by it. It must be seen in the role of the gale of perennial gale of creative destruction. It cannot be understood irrespective for it, or in this hypothesis that there is a perennial lull. Think in economics, our focus on steady state equilibrium, on long run, where things are finally the same and everybody is homogeneous. So this got me thinking with this firm evolution interest, and the premise here was really going into the evolutionary theory of the firm, that innovation patterns that are fascinating to me that are displayed by industry dynamics can be best understood through the underlying firm dynamics. Here, I claim my intellectual heritage from Penrose, who wrote The Growth of the Firm, and Nelson and Winter, who wrote The Evolutionary Theory of the Firm, and Teese, who talked about how profiting from innovation requires not just the main idea, but also the complementary assets that go along with it. Now, as I was getting into unpacking differences across firms, one of the things that I realized is that our characterization of firms that enter into these industries that I'm so fascinated by, either they're existing established firms within the industry or they are entrants. But more than that, when we think about entrants, we think about them as startups, as de novo, as small, as flexible, as ones that have, they're in fact almost sexy, if I can say that, right? But they're also resource constrained. On the other hand, when we think about incumbents, we say, yes, they have a lot of resources, they're inheriting a lot of knowledge, but they're dominant, they're inertial, they may not respond well to the onslaught of creative destruction. There's more to the story, though, than just thinking about entrants, i.e. entrepreneurial startups, incumbents, i.e. established. Because if we think about it, you really have either new to the industry, which is where the entrants versus incumbents dichotomy comes in. If you're new to the industry, you're an entrant. If you're already in the industry, you're an incumbent. But you could also think about whether you're new to the world. And so now you can think about a 2x2. Those of you who are in my executive MBA classes, you were waiting for my first 2x2, weren't you? Yeah. So here's the 2x2, and this is the only 2x2 I'll be using, by the way, in my entire talk. So if it is no and no, so you're not new to the industry, nor are you new to the world, that would be your classic incumbent, right? On the other hand, if you're new to the industry and you're new to the world, you would be a startup. But in between are established firms that enter from related industries, and those would be your diversifying entrants. They're established, but that they're new to the industry. Or on the other hand, you can have startups that are founded by ex-employees of existing firms in the industries. These are what we call spin-outs. And they do have prior knowledge. So now you've got a much, much more textured view of firms that are operating within these industries. And so as I was starting through this process, I started to examine, well, what are the benefits of prior knowledge? And again, within the industry context, one thing that was very clear in a study with Barry Bayes and also a study with Martin Genko, we were able to examine the benefits of prior knowledge that you get through operational experience from related industry. And we find that knowledge does benefit. The diversifying entrants do tend to outperform startups. However, this advantage disappears over the industry life cycle as more and more inside knowledge becomes relevant. And that prior knowledge can also impact spinouts. These startups that are created by employees who leave existing firms that are operating in the same industry to create startups. One of the things that we found, this study it really helped change the trajectory of my research and informed it in a very significant way. It was done with Raji Chambadi, April Franco, and M.B. Sarkar. So one thing that we found out when we did a deep dive, so the study with Barry, for instance, was a deep dive into personal computers. And we were able to see diversifying firms from related industries outperform startups. But on the other hand, you also know that in PCs, the startups ultimately really benefited. In the disk drive industry, 25% of all entrants were spinouts. And indeed, they outperformed all other entrants in this industry. But what was also very important is what caused these firms to spin out in the first place, what caused these individuals to leave. And the existing literature emphasized the fact that if you were on the cutting edge of knowledge, if you were one of these high-tech firms that were really, really doing a great job amassing knowledge, then this was just the cost of doing business. You're creating so much knowledge, there's going to be spillovers, and so abundant knowledge is going to cause lots of your employees to leave and start their own firms. What we showed, however, is that it was not abundant knowledge per se, but when that knowledge was not being put to good use. So if you had technological capabilities as a firm, but you did not pioneer markets as a result of those capabilities, or if you sense new market opportunities, but you did not have the technological acumen to back it up, that's when you had employees leave to start their own ventures and do the same. So it was the unexploited knowledge that was begetting spinouts rather than abundant knowledge per se. The survival benefits of established firms relative to startups also depended. So rather than, where's Basu? I think he's here, right? It depends, right, Basu? Right? So what does it depend on? It depends on the ability to address growing pains as firms transition to incumbency in new industries. So Pauline Chen, who was my first doctoral student, along with Charlie Williams, who was at Illinois at the same time with me, the three of us embarked into a deep dive of telecommunications industries and looked at all of these diversifying entrants, think the baby bells, along with a lot of new startups that were coming in. And what was interesting is that upfront, when they first entered, there was no difference in the survival rates or performance of the startups versus the diversifying entrants. But over time, it was precisely because the diversifying firms had already changed themselves, reconfigured their capabilities to enter this new industry, that they were able to deal with new technological shocks. They were able to deal with the challenges of age and size much, much better than the startups. And indeed, it was these capabilities to renew themselves that we found, Connie Helfet and I, in the Strategic Renewal of Organizations, did a deep dive of IBM that has survived more than 100 years. And we tried to figure out, well, what made IBM so different from many of these yesteryear firms that are not even around. So if you're thinking about firms that have lasted 100 years or more, IBM, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, right? Think about McDonald's too. It has had to do a significant change in the product portfolio that it offers us as culture has changed. And then think in terms of Kodak and Blockbuster and Borders. These are firms that used to be yesteryear giants that are not even around. But it is really the ability to change. My executive MBA students who are here know about our case about Blockbuster versus Netflix. And Netflix has been able to weather the changes of streaming video much, much better than Blockbuster was able to weather the change that was brought along by Netflix. But I have a confession here too. Industries don't make decisions. Some of you already thought about this, right? Especially my OB scholars. Come on, Rajshree. Firms don't make decisions, individuals do, right? And so this led me to another realization at the end of stage 2. Even in studies of employee entrepreneurship, the unit of analysis in my work was the firm. The individual was absent because I had transformed founder capabilities into firm capabilities. So I needed to expand focus. In addition, employee entrepreneurship is just one context within which individuals embed and get their prior knowledge. And so what are some of the other contexts? What are some of the pre-entry capabilities and knowledge at the individual level? And how are interactions in strategic human capital markets determining what decisions individuals are making themselves? So that got me to thinking back to the study where I remembered that individuals had been a very important conduit of knowledge diffusion. However, evolutionary studies, both in economics and in strategy, are very silent about the role of individuals. We tend to do it only at the firm level or at the industry level. So Schumpeter has something to say there too. In the individual point of the view, by the way, this is a very simple but beautiful statement, I think. The businessman feels himself to be in a competitive situation even if he is alone in the market. Even if you are a monopoly and you're the only firm and the only game in town, you cannot rest on your laurels. You have to worry about the fact that there is going to be someone that might render your capabilities obsolete. So even if you're alone, you still fear competition. So in the individual evolution stage of my career, the focus of my work was firmly in human capital. And so here, these innovation patterns that are displayed by industry dynamics, that can be studied by the underlying firm dynamics, are really because of an interaction between the co-creators of knowledge, the individuals and the organizations within which they're embedded. Here, my intellectual heritage is from Gary Becker, who of course did a lot of the work on human capital, and also Thies adapted to the individual lens. That's Athena coming out of Zeus's head, fully formed. By the way, Athena is also the goddess of knowledge, even as she has a full-bodied armor. So it begs the question, how did Athena come out of Zeus's brain? Or more importantly, in my context, where do these entrepreneurial entrants come from? Are they really fully formed? Or do they have some basis in their prior knowledge which they rely on as they enter into new industries? So going back to this famous 5-stage industry life cycle that Michael Gort and Stephen Klepper had documented, Sonali Shah, who's in the audience today, and I looked at the knowledge context of entrepreneurship. So remember when we talked about the spin-outs and the other industry startups? An example of a spin-out is, of course, Intel. Intel was formed by Gordon Moore and Bill Noyce when they left Fairchild Semiconductor to create Intel. On the other hand, you can think about Google. Google is an example of academic entrepreneurship, where Sergey Brin and Larry Page used the knowledge during their PhD to come up with an algorithm that helped start up Google. That's an example of science pushing the knowledge and then being utilized. A third example, of course, is Apple. Garage tinkerers that come up with a new product, users looking at a product that they need and coming up with it themselves. By the way, Sonali is one of the foremost scholars on user entrepreneurship, and I know very early on to latch myself on to good scholars, right? And that's exactly what I've seen across all of the research that I've done. So what Sonali and I did is really take stock of all of the empirical studies on entrepreneurship coming across of these knowledge bases. And what we found, and then we tried to juxtapose what was the industry life cycle that these entrepreneurial firms were coming into. And what we found is that indeed in the early stages, Gordon Klepper talked about how in the early stages of an industry, it's the outside knowledge that is relevant. Well, where is the outside knowledge coming from? Who's bringing it? In addition to the diversifying firms from related industries, this is where we saw a very, very high incidence of both user entrepreneurs as well as academic entrepreneurs. As a result of that, they were bringing in new product innovations. And as startups coming, not having the industry basis or even the related industry knowledge and complementary assets, they tended to either collaborate with established firms in related industries, or they were just complementing them side by side. On the other hand, in the growth stage is when you see the rise of employee entrepreneurs. In part, of course, it is that you have to have some incumbents in order for individuals to gain experience in those incumbents. But the implications of this for the industry life cycle is quite different. So while the industry life cycle scholars had experimentation as a reason for why you might see product innovation earlier on, and once the dominant design is settled, you're going to have more process innovation, one thing that we were finding in these studies is that employee entrepreneurs are going to have more operational knowledge. So they can bring with them, in addition to product innovations, also process innovations. And precisely because they have this insider knowledge, they can compete head-on with the established firms. So you see the strategies changing too, from less collaboration, less complementarity, to more direct competition. And then, of course, in the final stage of the mature stages of an industry, you tend to see, again, employee entrepreneurs dominate, but niche entry by users in particular, because the main market focuses on scale, so there are these unmet needs in segmented areas that these firms can then take over. And so as a result, you see competition, collaboration, and complementary strategies being employed by the startups. We also did a deep dive into high-performing individuals. And here, Ben Campbell, who's also in the audience, along with Martin Genko and April Franco and Seth Carnahan, we had access to microdata from the census that linked individuals and firms almost over a 20-year period. This is like the gold mine of trying to understand linkages between individuals and the firms that they're organizing. So we were able to really focus on high-performing individuals and how they differed in both their strategies as well as in their outcomes relative to others. So high-performing individuals, we found, were much, much more likely to stay within their established organization. But if they left, they were much more likely to start new companies. And as a result of the fact that they were creating competition from within, you also saw spin-outs exert a far more negative effect on the parent than if an employee left to join an established firm. the other thing that I found out with Ben and with Seth is that these high-performing individuals do seek firms that will pay for performance. But it was interesting. That didn't mean that if they were already in a high-performing firm, pay-for-performing firm, that they would stay. We found, surprisingly, that many of these high performers being compensated really, really well, but still chose to leave those positions and start a new company, often with a pay cut, right? So hold on to that thought. But the other interesting finding as we were examining large-scale data, millions of observations, right? Where's Ben? He's hiding somewhere. There he is, right? He's the one that was cranking all of the data. I can sit back and say, yep, we did a lot of hard work. That was him, along with Martin and Seth. But the other thing that we found was that these high-performing individuals were able to hurt the parent firm and help their startup's performance, not because of their own ability per se, but because they were able to convince other high performers, create better teams, bigger teams, to join them. And that was what mattered in terms of their ability to impact performance. So that leads me to my next confession. Industries don't make decisions. Firms don't make decisions. Individuals do. But they take into account not only their operational context and their abilities, but also their aspirations. That study that Ben, Seth, and I did that showed that individuals were willing to take a pay cut in order to start their own firm meant that it was not just monetary incentives that was driving firm behavior. And that when you have secondary data and you're using archival analysis, that leads to a very nice study of capabilities, but not necessarily motivations, because you can't figure out why somebody did something. You can tell how much, what was their age, what was their education, how much experience did they have, but why did they start? That's not something that the census data was going to inform us by. And preferences and motivations matter. At the same time, Atsushi Oyama, who's also here, by the way, Atsushi was Michael's last student, and he chose to be a postdoc with me, so kind of the circle was complete out there. But when Atsushi was visiting at Illinois in a postdoc position, he and I went into a deep dive of the National Science Foundation data on scientists and engineers that are graduating from universities. And what we were able to show is that there was sorting going on, that people chose whether to go into academia or industry, whether to go into an applied or a basic domain, not just based on their abilities, but also because of their preferences. And so there was really this need to embrace selection, not just control for it, to think very carefully about these interdependencies between ability and aspiration, and these interactions between enterprise and markets. So this brings Schumpeterian economic system view to the limelight. A process of industrial mutation that incessantly revolutionizes the economic structure from within. It's people inside the economic structure that are bringing about change rather than it coming from outside. Incessantly destroying the old one, incessantly creating a new one. This process of creative destruction is an essential fact of capitalism. So today, I'm looking at enterprise and markets. As the director of the Ed Snyder Center of Enterprise and Markets, I was able to, in fact, I'm fortunate that I was given the opportunity to really think about what does this mean, not just scholarship-wise, but also as it relates to applications, as well as it relates to learning and teaching. So here, the economic system's premise is really that markets and institutions are within which enterprising people make decisions based on their abilities and aspirations, and in turn, they're both responding and creating new markets and institutions and industries in the process. Here, the intellectual heritage goes both on the psychology side to Coleman, who is a social psychologist. By the way, Justin Frake, he's sick, which is why he's not here right now. He's the student that first called my attention to Coleman's boat, the fact that we can only understand micro phenomena well if we go underlying to it the micro foundations of it. Or Dan Pink, who said that in addition to monetary incentives, people care deeply about mastery, about purpose, about autonomy. And also, at the same time, to classical scholars such as Wallace and North. John Wallace is here. Lots and lots of interesting conversations in Jewel of India, right, John? Which really informed my understanding of what institutions matter and how do they differ across developing and developed contexts. In addition to that, of course, Rosenberg. I see both Brent and David are here, and both of them, of course, are students of Rosenberg, either directly or indirectly through that. So remember that study that I said really impacted my own scholarship when I looked at spinouts. Using quantitative secondary data, what we had found was that spinouts are a result not of abundant knowledge per se, but of underexploited knowledge. And that established firms that had either high technological or market pioneering capabilities that by themselves were actually going to increase spinouts. But if you had both, then the likelihood of spinouts were reduced. So from that analysis, which was absolutely right on the capabilities side, we made some inferences about what was going on in terms of the entrepreneurial team formation. And of course, this is also informed by the dominant logic in economic models, and that is about rational optimization. That if you have teams that are working in R&D labs on an idea or on a technology, they take it to their manager, and the manager says, not important out here, we're not going to do it. So then they say, well, if you're not going to do it, we're going to take this idea, and then we're going to go out and start our own firm, right? And this, of course, also relates to this economic calculus of, am I going to make more money if I were to develop this idea within the established firm, or am I going to make more money if I take it outside? So here the primacy is on ideas and technology. And the assumption is that the founding teams were already working together in the incumbent firm itself prior to venturing out. But Sonali is a qualitative scholar, and she cares deeply about asking entrepreneurs questions. So we went to those same disk drive founders to whom we had gathered rich quantitative data. And so Sonali, Raj, and I embarked on this study where we found that actually that was not quite what was happening. And indeed, for the better founders, and so for the better spinouts, money is the reward, not the reason. And often, these entrepreneurial founding teams were created because a ringleader chose to venture out. Often because they felt either that their values weren't aligned with their established company, and here I'm talking about values as in philosophical values, not monetary values, or they believed that they could make more of a difference outside the established firm rather than inside. And this ringleader very deliberately engages into a search process in what we call human capital corridors. So it is as if one of you chooses that you want to create a startup, and across all of the people that you come across within your organization, you figure out who is the best-in-class talent, who's also aligned on the values with you and complementary in your skill capabilities. This is what we call full team building capabilities. And we saw consistently that founding teams that exhibited these team building skills consistently outperformed founding teams that had only partial of these team building processes. More importantly, remember I told you that Sergey is doing this years and years of analysis in the cotton spinning industry right around the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. In fact, the cotton spinning industry in Japan is credited for Japan's status in much of the early 20th century as being the only developed country in the Far East. What we found when we studied the entrepreneurial founding teams that then transitioned into top management teams is that shared and stable leadership that shows not just these complementarities and skills, but also stability, the ability to manage disagreements. When you have strategic leaders, all of who are coming from different backgrounds, but as a result are also going to be best in class, you are going to have frictions. So it's not the fact that you have frictions, but how these firms manage the frictions that really ultimately determine whether they become centers of gravity. And we use the term centers of gravity to denote those firms that started off small, started off early in the industry, but later on ended up dominating the industry. 80 to 90% of the output can be attributed to these 7 firms over a 30-year period. And more importantly, 80 to 90% of the top talent, engineering talent, were sucked in by what we call these centers of gravity. So it's the top management teams that are able to show the shared and stable leadership that are really at the heart of firms' growth themselves. And of course, markets matter. They enable enterprising individuals to trade with each other. And here is where Maka, who's also in the audience, did a deep dive in the ag biotech industry. And she examined the incubation period, the period pre-commercialization, which was missing in that Gordon-Klepper model, because the period 0 was the instance of first commercialization. And again, the received wisdom before Maka's dissertation was that the industry is born because an integrated firm decides to commercialize this, because the only way an innovator can introduce the product is to do it themselves and get all of the capabilities. Well, it begs the question, how did this firm integrate all of the necessary capabilities and start like Athena coming out of zoos? No. What Maka shows in her dissertation is that there are vibrant markets for technology and corporate control. Most industry evolution studies up until that assume that these markets are inefficient or absent. Instead, what Maka showed is, in fact, academic startups, they have the biotech knowledge. Seed firms from the obsolescing agricultural industry base, they have the stock of hybrid seeds that are very, very relevant. And diversifying firms are able to reconfigure a lot of these capabilities. So it is the reconfiguration and the integration of all of these relevant capabilities within the firm by acquisitions, through alliances, that really causes firms to build what is necessary for the industry to take off. In another study that we're doing right now, Sonali and Steve look at how industries emerge when markets don't even exist in developing firm contexts. And here we're examining the role, particularly, so a lot of the things that Maka was doing in the ag biotech industry, and when she and I were studying it, we could take a lot of institutions for granted because this industry was created in the United States. But there are other industries that are not even new to the world, and they fail to take off in developing countries. Think metal silos in Honduras. 50 years after metal silos has already been a mainstay across most of the developed world. Why is this industry not taking off in Honduras? This is something that Steve Sanka, who is an agricultural economist at the University of Illinois and one of my mentors also here, had us think much more deeply on. And then we compared that with mobile money in M-Pesa in Kenya. And what we're seeing out here is that aid agencies have an important role to play, particularly in addressing the institutional voids that for-profit firms by themselves cannot address. So really, this is the question of, in order for markets to be created, for for-profit institutions to take over, you need some basic institutions to already exist. But more importantly, a cool finding that at least I learned from this study is that most of these firms, aid agencies as well as the for-profit firms that engaged in it, didn't say, oh, we're going to go into Honduras and solve all of their institutional problems first. No, they went through and very deliberately addressed bottlenecks as they came through. So they didn't solve the entire problem, but they solved all of the problems that were relevant as they were dealing with the experimentation of bringing this industry to market. And then finally, with Evan, who did a phenomenal survey of the entire set of industries across the US for his dissertation. Where are you, Evan? Oh, you're there, right? He conducted this non-compete survey, and using this data, Evan and Justin and I are now looking into what is the effect of non-competes on people that have not signed it. So you can say there's a freedom to contract versus a freedom to trade issue. And people that sign non-competes do so willingly. But if that willing signing creates negative externalities by increasing market frictions and impacts even people that have not willingly signed, then markets are not at work, and we need to worry about it. So what I hope I've given you here is some flavor of all of the things that have fascinated me and what I have learned from. I've always been fascinated by innovation and enterprise as engines of upward mobility of individuals, of firms, and of industries. And what I'd like to do in this final section is go a little bit more personal, if you would allow me that luxury. I want to share with you why I feel that now my journey is my destination. Now, before I do that, I'd like to share with you, this is a Scholar-Teacher Award. And so, of course, part of this relates not just, as Alex said, to my scholarship, but also to my mentorship. Now, so I turned to all of my former students and current students, and I asked them to please reflect back on our co-authorships and tell us what it is that they observed of the capabilities. Tell me, tell us, what is it that they observed of the capabilities of the processes? Now, I did ask them, I said, please focus on the capabilities, focus on the processes, please do not talk about me. They do not listen to instructions well, right? So I can say this to you, how dare they show that they love and respect me as much as they do as you watch this, okay? So this is my dream team.
We always think about, well, it's people who are working on research need to be very smart and they need to have good skills, but we often don't realize, at least maybe early on in our careers, we don't realize the importance of drive.
I learned the energy that you really need to do this job. And that's something that I think anybody who meets Rajshree, this is something that jumps out right away.
The running gag is we all have our specialty. Like if you need a goofy identification strategy and a weird way to test something with stats, I'm your guy. If you need someone to be very thorough and explore something from all possible sides and rewrite a paper 10 times, you talk to Seth. If you need someone who can, who just has just the most critical mind for theory, then Maka is the one that you talk to.
Her ability to collaborate was what got me interested in doing research on how networks or collaboration foster innovation.
It really sort of tasked me with the rest of my career of building teams of people who complement what I do, who appreciate what I bring to the table, and people that ultimately I enjoy working with, that I learn from, and hopefully that they learn from me and enjoy working with me also.
She is not afraid to write a big paper that may potentially question or show incompleteness in what she had already published herself. And for me as a junior scholar, as a doctoral student, seeing that type of openness toward advancement of science.
She has a very collaborative mindset. She never sees even related projects or related ideas or related findings published in other journals, that this is something which is competing with her.
She's very much of the idea that there's a market for ideas. You want to share ideas, improve them, talk with other people. And that's something that really has spilled over to me and something that I really continue doing now.
So I hated working in teams in college. And the way I approached Rajshree was as a co-author was not really very effective. And so I knew that I wanted to write kind of a sociological paper. And I knew that Rajshree was an economist and she was going to want to write an economics-based paper. And so rather than approaching this as a collaborative effort, I decided to plant a stake in the ground. So I wrote a purely sociological paper, knowing that she was going to try to write an economics paper. And in my mind, it was going to be one or the other. And I approached this as a battle. She would have won that battle if it were really a battle. She's perfectly capable of writing an economics front end in an afternoon that would have topped mine. But instead of doing that, she sat me down and we iterated over a week or two. And what we ended up with is this third option that I hadn't even considered. And it was this interdisciplinary paper that kind of weaved the sociological theories and the economic theories together. And we ended up with a paper that, it won several awards. One of them was the best interdisciplinary paper.
She's very pragmatic and she doesn't play the blame game at all. So a good example is my dissertation, the third essay. There's this error in how the data was coded, and which gave us these really cool results that absolutely did not exist. I thought that I was going to catch hell for that. I have never walked into a meeting with co-authors so petrified about getting my head ripped off. And I walked in, explained exactly what was going on, and before anybody else said anything, Rajshree's like, well, we all should have caught it. Doesn't matter. Let's move on. What can we do?
It doesn't matter whether you are a student, whether you're a junior faculty, which school you're coming from. She listens to you as equal status contributors.
She doesn't see different roles on a paper as beneath her. It's something that we're all in together on.
The important part of this that I think is undervalued is that it requires a lot of trust. So if I didn't have the trust that Rajshree was going to treat that rough draft gently, then I wouldn't be able to do this.
Your paper has to have what she calls a hook. And so I have this indelible image of Rajshree in so many seminars asking me and other people, I think your paper's interesting, but really you have to ask yourself, what's your hook? What are you trying to tell the audience?
I can still see the so what question hanging over my head that Rajshree asked all the time while we worked.
She is matching effort with effort. So whatever students or collaborators are putting in, that much she's putting in as well.
She matches effort with effort. So if she knows that you worked late at night for 2 nights, she will be the person who wakes up the third morning at 3 a.m. and 3 a.m. is her time.
Regular meetings and the way she conducts these meetings to divide the research work and to help co-authors work on a project.
We started to have back and forth discussions about those papers. And it felt to me like a reading club for a while because we were doing intensive discussions. Go deep, do not cut corners, but be efficient by identifying and putting most of one's energy on the most important points.
Rajshree has this hot potato method of writing a paper. It's totally exhausting, but the iterations happen, sometimes several times a day. It allows me to see how she's rewriting what I've written. And so it allows me to learn how to write a paper better.
She's extremely dedicated to the learning process during that partnership. So you say this is what you have done. This is what I have done. Do you see why what I did is better? And if you don't, she will explain it to you. And if you disagree, she'll stand up for what she'll do, but she also will listen to you.
What I came away with that is that one, co-authorships are valuable. And it's not just that it shares the work. The two of us working together made a better paper than either one of us could have made on our own.
This was the project with Rajshree and with Seth Carnahan. And at the end of this project, we worked very hard, like all projects. It was a big struggle, lots of revisions, very, very challenging process. At the end of the process, it's finally accepted. We're feeling good. And I forget who sent the first email around, but one of the three of us sent an email to the other two saying, I'm sorry, guys. You carried all the work, all the weight on this project. I got to do all the easy stuff. And immediately, the other two people responded with, wait, I was just about ready to send that exact same email that you guys did all the hard work. I got to focus on the easy stuff. Like, how could it be possible that all three of us thought that we were the one who was shirking, that we were the free rider here? And eventually, like, we realized that this is exactly how teams should work, that you get to do what you love doing, what is easiest for you, and somebody else takes the lead on what they love doing and what's easiest for them. And then you put it all together and you end up with something that is so much better than any one person could have done as a whole.
Forget about all of the nice things they said to me, but they're awesome. So they do make my journey the destination. I have always been fascinated by innovation and enterprise. And that's why I chose to journey here to the United States, where I was free to make my own mistakes, where I was free to make my own decisions, to chart my own path forward. I am so happy that I am in this country because this was founded on the principles of free enterprise and free markets. My destination is here, not just in this country, but in Maryland, where there is a culture of excellence, colleagues who nurture each other as they strive for excellence. I want to be no place but in my profession where I get to be an intellectual entrepreneur. This is my destination in the form of the Snyder Center, where I have leaders, executive MBA alums for that matter, with me, hand in hand, shoulder in shoulder, armed by the same vision. This is the place where I've built my home, where I see my two daughters having the same enterprising spirit as they are forging ahead to the world. And this is the place that I have made my home with my husband, Rob, who's the wind beneath my wings. Thank you for sharing my journey.